I think ideas get me high. I think of myself as a pretty savvy person and not easily led into false dogma. And yet, this is such a strange idea. And so it's basically a plea for help. It's not a cult. It's not that I want you to join me in believing in this. It's that this is so outlandish that join me as a scientist would join a research team, and let's cut it to pieces and show that it was simply a misunderstanding of information theory coupled with bad mathematics spliced onto a weak ontology or something like that, you know. Because this I could live with the time wave if I only had to read about it in Time magazine and that it was being developed by Negroponte and Prigozhin. The thing that sets up the cognitive dissonance for me is that I, from the point of view of most people, thought it up. And I am so aware of my limitations that to me that's the strongest argument there is, that it's malarkey, you know. And yet that's not a fair argument against an idea. In rhetoric, that's called the ad hominem argument, the argument to the man. That's when you get up and say, well, we shouldn't follow Jesse Helms because he's short and ugly. You know, that's not allowed. That's a below-the-belt move. And then I read books like Thomas Kuhn's The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, and it says, you know, this is how it happens. Some guy, marginal, not at the center of the field, and somewhat at loose ends, but usually with a broad education, gets it, you know. I mean, it happened to Einstein. He was a telegrapher. It happened to Alfred Russel Wallace. He was a surveyor who couldn't make a living, and so he went to Indonesia to collect butterflies for the British Museum. And we could multiply these examples ad infinitum. So, but I have spent a lot of time educating myself about what it would mean if this were true. In other words, how big a revolution is it? And it's an enormous revolution. The implications are staggering. For example, if it's true that time is a fluctuating variable, as this so strongly argues, then science as practiced for the past 500 years is out the window, because that kind of science is based on the concept of experiment. And experiment has built into it the concept of what's called a restoration of initial conditions. That means you can go back to the start and run the experiment again. This is saying, as Heraclitus said, you never step into the same river twice. And consequently, the idea of repetitive experiment is shown to be intellectually bankrupt. You could almost say, pardon me?
Have recognized that.
Well, some have and some haven't. The idea that you would specify in a physics experiment that it should be done only when the moon is in Scorpio to obtain the correct results would get you...
But those experiments are primarily Newtonian in orientation, are they not? I mean,
well, give me an example of a time-dependent physical experiment recognized by science.
Dropping a ball out of the Tower of Pisa.
Well, it doesn't matter what time you do it.
Precisely.
That's my point. That's my point. That we could almost say of science that it is the study of those phenomena so crude that the time in which they occur does not affect them. And so falling balls, gas diffusion, simple things, it doesn't matter where in time they occur. But things like the building of an empire, the waging of a war, the evolution of a species, the conquest of a biome by a new set of genes, these things, timing is everything and dictates success or failure. Did you want to say something?
Yeah, that's a very interesting point, because the anthropic, the weak anthropic cosmological principle argues that life evolved at about the right time. If things had started up a little bit later, a little bit sooner, at least around this sun, it wouldn't necessarily have gotten a kickstart. The conditions were no longer quite right. The incubator was set to just the right temperature when the gases were at just the right concentrations and so on. And Stephen Gould has pointed out that we couldn't even play the tape over again if you started off with life at one of the early conditions 3.5 billion years ago and then ran it forward again. We wouldn't have ended up with people, and we wouldn't have ended up with the kinds of species we have. There are too many bifurcation points that can take place along the line. So there's actually 2 points there.
Yes, well, this is essentially what this is saying. Ordinary science says that evolution proceeds by the random mixing of genes, then subject to natural selection dictated by environmental parameters. And out of that, you do get a creative advance, or an advance into morphological complexity, but very slowly. And I think that what the time wave shows is that the deck, the cosmic deck, is stacked in favor of novelty, so that it isn't a 50-50 every time you throw the dice, that it's going to go toward entropy or order. Actually, order is favored, and so order emerges and is conserved over time, or novelty. I prefer the term novelty because to me chaos doesn't signify disorder. I view it in the new way.